Chapter 7. Bicorporeity and Transfiguration. Apparitions of the spirit of persons in the flesh. Doubles. Saint Alfonso of Liguori and Saint Anthony of Padua. Vespasian. Transfiguration, invisibility. Bicorporeity and transfiguration are varieties of the order of visual manifestations. And strange as they may at first appear, it will be easily seen from the explanation we are enabled to give of them that they are not outside the order of natural phenomena. Both are consequences of the principle that what is true of the properties of the perispirit after death is true of the perispirit of people in the flesh. We have seen that during sleep the spirit recovers a portion of its normal freedom because it partially isolates itself from the body, a state in which we have often had the opportunity of observing it. The spirit, whether a man be alive or dead, possesses at all times a semi-material envelope, which through the action of the same causes that we have already set forth, may temporarily acquire both visibility and tangibility. Unquestionable facts have removed all doubt on this point. We will only adduce here a few cases for which we can vouch from our own personal knowledge, but many of our readers will probably be able to recall analogous facts by consulting their memory. The wife of a friend of ours frequently saw entering her chamber during the night, whether she had a light on or not, a woman who sold fruit in her neighborhood, whom she knew by sight but to whom she had never spoken. This apparition terrified her all the more, because at the time she knew nothing of spiritism, and because the vision frequently recurred. The fruit seller was not only in the flesh when these apparitions took place, but was probably in bed and asleep at the moment of their occurrence. While her material body was at home, her spirit and her fluidic body were in this lady's room, moved by what motive we cannot say. In such a case, a spiritist acquainted with the subject of apparitions would have asked her visitant what she wanted. But as the lady in question knew nothing of such things, the idea of doing so never entered her mind. Each time the apparition occurred, it vanished without her knowing how. And after each disappearance, she assured herself that all the doors were perfectly closed and that no one could have entered the room, a precaution which proved to her that she had been really awake and was not under the influence of a dream. At other times this lady saw, in the same way, a man whom she did not know. But one day she saw her brother, who was then in California. He had so exactly the appearance of a real person that at first she thought he must have returned, and was about to speak to him, but he disappeared before she had time to do so. A letter afterwards received showed that he was not dead. This lady was what may be called a natural seeing medium, but at this time, as we have said before, she had never heard that mediums existed. Another lady, who lives in a country town, being seriously ill, saw one night about 10 o'clock in her bedroom an old gentleman, an inhabitant of the same town, whom she sometimes met in society, but with whom she was but very slightly acquainted. This gentleman was sitting in an armchair at the foot of her bed. He took from time to time a pinch of snuff, and looked as though he were watching her. Surprised at such a visit at such an hour, she was about to ask him the motive of his coming, but he made a sign to her not to speak, and to go to sleep. Several times she was about to speak to him, but each time he renewed the signal, and at last she fell asleep. Some days afterwards, having recovered from her illness, she received a visit from the same gentleman, but at a more suitable hour, and at this time it was really he. He wore the same clothes, carried the same snuff-box, and his manner was just as before. Persuaded that he had visited her during her illness, she thanked him for his kindness in coming to her. But the gentleman, much surprised, told her that he had not had the pleasure of seeing her for a long time. The lady, who was cognizant of spirit phenomena, saw at once what had occurred, but not caring to enter into an explanation of the matter, contented herself with saying that she had probably been dreaming. And it was no doubt the case, the incredulous will say, but it is certain that this lady was not asleep, any more than the one first mentioned. If she had been dreaming, she must therefore have been dreaming when wide awake. In other words, she must have been laboring under an hallucination. What a glorious word that is! What a comprehensive explanation of everything that we do not comprehend. As we have already sufficiently refuted this objection, we will continue to address ourselves to those who are able to understand us. Here is a fact still more characteristic, and one which we should be curious to see explained by the theory of an excited imagination. A gentleman living in the country would never marry, notwithstanding the persuasions of his family. They were very anxious that he should form an alliance with a lady living in a neighboring town whom he had never seen. One day, while in his bedroom, he was struck with astonishment at seeing before him a young girl dressed in white with a wreath of flowers on her head. She informed him that she was betrothed to him and held out her hand, which he took in his and on which he saw an engagement ring. A few moments afterwards, she vanished. Taken aback by this strange occurrence and having assured himself that he was quite awake, he asked the people of the house if anyone had come in during the day, but they assured him that they had seen no one. A year afterwards, yielding to the renewed solicitations of his relations, he made up his mind to go and see the young lady who had been so strongly recommended to him. He arrived in the town where she lived on the day of Fête Dieu. All the townsfolk were returning from the procession, and one of the first persons he saw on entering the dwelling of the young lady's family was a young girl whom he instantly recognized as the person who had appeared to him a year before. She was dressed just as he had seen her, for the apparition we should have stated took place on the Fête Dieu of the preceding year. He was struck dumb with amazement. The young lady, on catching sight of him, uttered a cry of surprise and fainted. On recovering consciousness, she declared that she had already seen the gentleman on that very day the year before. The acquaintance, so strangely begun, ended in a marriage. All this occurred about the year 1835, before Spiritism had been heard of, and besides, both the gentleman and the lady were extremely prosaic, matter-of-fact people, with imaginations as little excitable as could be conceived of. It will perhaps be surmised that these persons may have had their minds filled with the idea of the proposed union between them, and that this preoccupation produced an hallucination in both of them. But we must not forget that on the husband's side, indifference had been the predominant feeling, and that it was not until a year after the apparition had occurred that he made up his mind to go and see the young lady in question. Those who would explain the matter as being a case of hallucination are bound to explain the double apparition, for the lady also saw the gentleman the year before, the coincidence of the festival day and of the costume, and the mutual recognition of the parties, circumstances which could not be the product of the imagination. Before going farther, we must reply to a question that will certainly be asked. How can the body live while the spirit is absent? We reply that it is possible for the body to live with only the organic life which is independent of the spirit's presence. But we must add that during earth life, the spirit is never completely detached from the body. Spirits, as well as certain seeing mediums, perceive that the spirit of one in the flesh, when away from the body, is united to it by a luminous trail, which reaches to the body, a phenomenon which never occurs when the body is dead, for then the separation is complete. It is by this channel of communication that the spirit is instantaneously informed, however far away he may be, of the need which the body may have of his presence, and he then returns to the body with the swiftness of lightning. It follows, therefore, that the body can never die during the spirit's absence, and that the spirit, on his return, can never find the door of his fleshly habitation closed against him, as some romancers have pretended in their imaginary tales. But to return to our subject, the spirit of a person in the flesh, when partially disengaged from the body, can show himself just as well as that of one who has departed this life, and with all the appearance of reality, and may even, through the means already described, acquire a momentary tangibility. This is the phenomenon designated as bicorporeity, which has given rise to the stories of doubles, that is to say, of individuals who have been proved to have been simultaneously present in two different places. Here are two examples of this fact, taken not from mere popular legends, but from ecclesiastical history. Saint Alfonso Liguori was canonized before the lapse of the usual period after his death, because he was seen simultaneously in two different places, which was accounted a miracle. When St. Anthony of Padua was in Spain, while he was one day preaching, his father, who was at Padua, was being led to death, having been accused of murder. At the moment when he was about to be executed, St. Anthony appeared, proved his father to be innocent, and pointed out the real criminal who underwent the punishment of his crime. It was subsequently ascertained that at this time, St. Anthony had not quitted Spain. St. Alfonso, having been evoked by us for interrogation in regard to these occurrences, the following conversation took place between us. Can you give us an explanation of this phenomenon? Yes, a man who, as the result of his moral advancement, has attained to a certain degree of dematerialization, can show himself in a place other than that in which his body is, and by the following means. Finding sleep to be stealing upon him, he asks of God that his spirit may be enabled to transport itself to a given place. If his request is granted, his spirit abandons his fleshly body. As soon as the latter falls asleep and, accompanied by a part of his perispirit, leaves the gross material body in a state closely bordering on death. I say bordering on death because there still remains in the body a link which cannot be defined, but which keeps up its union with the perispirit and the soul. The perispirit then appears in the place where the spirit desires to show himself. Your statement does not explain our question as regards the visibility and the tangibility of the perispirit. The spirit, finding himself disengaged from the bonds of matter according to his degree of elevation, can render himself tangible by a special action on matter. Is the sleep of the body indispensable in order that the spirit may appear in another place? The soul can divide itself when it feels itself attracted to a place other than that in which its body is. It may happen that the body is not asleep when it takes place, though it is a very rare occurrence. But on such occasions the body is never in a perfectly normal state. It is always more or less entranced. Remark: the soul does not divide itself in the literal sense of those words. It radiates in different directions and can thus manifest itself on several points without being divided, just as a light can be simultaneously reflected in several mirrors. How would it be if a man whose spirit is appearing elsewhere while his body is asleep were suddenly awakened? That could not happen because if anyone approached his body with the intention of awaking it, the spirit would re-enter it before the intention could be executed, for the spirit would read the thoughts of the intending disturber. The same explanation has repeatedly been given to us by the spirits of persons deceased as well as living. St. Alfonso explains the fact of the double presence, but he does not give us the theory of visibility and of tangibility. Tacitus reports an analogous fact. During the months passed by Vespasian in Alexandria, awaiting the periodical return of the summer winds and the season when the sea is smoothest, various prodigies took place, showing the favor of heaven and the interest which the gods seemed to take in that prince. These prodigies increased Vespasian's desire to visit the sacred sojourn of the god and to consult him concerning the empire. He gave orders that the temple should be kept closely shut, so that no one but himself might enter it. When being entirely absorbed in anticipation of what the oracle was about to utter, he perceived behind him one of the principal Egyptians, named Basilides, whom he knew to be retained by illness at some distance from Alexandria. He questioned the priests as to whether Basilides had been that day in the temple. He inquired of the passer-by whether they had seen him in the town. At last he sent horsemen and acquired through them the certainty that at the moment of the apparition Basilides was 80 miles away. He then no longer doubted that the vision was supernatural, and the name of Basilides was accepted by him in lieu of the oracle. The individual who appears simultaneously in two different places has then two bodies, but of these one alone is real, the other is only an appearance. We may say that the first lives with the organic life and the second with that of the soul. On awaking, the two bodies reunite, and the life of the soul re-enters the material body. We have no reason to suppose that in this state of partial separation, the two bodies can possess active and intelligent vitality simultaneously and in the same degree. It follows, moreover, from what we have just said, that the real body could not die and the apparent body still remain visible, the approach of death always recalling the spirit to the body, if only for an instant. It also follows that the apparent body could not be killed because it is not organic and is not formed of flesh and bone. It would instantly disappear if anyone tried to kill it. Let us now consider the second phenomenon, that of transfiguration. This consists in the change of aspect of a living body. As an illustration of this phenomenon, we adduce a fact that occurred in the years 1858 and 1859 in the neighborhood of Saint-Étienne, and for the authenticity of which we can vouch. A young lady about 15 years of age had the singular faculty of transforming herself. That is to say, she could assume at times the appearance of persons who were dead. The illusion was so complete that the person simulated appeared to be actually present. So exact was the resemblance of features, expression, voice, and even of peculiarities of speech. This phenomenon occurred hundreds of times without the girl's will having anything to do with it. She often assumed the appearance of her brother, who had been dead many years, presenting the similitude not only of his face, but his height and the size of his body. A physician of the place who had several times witnessed these strange occurrences made the following experiment, with a view to assuring himself that he was not under an illusion. We have the fact from his own lips, from the girl's father, and from several other ocular witnesses of most honorable character and unquestionable veracity. It occurred to the physician to weigh this young lady, first in her normal state, and then in her state of transfiguration, when she had assumed the appearance of her brother, who was more than 20 years of age when he died, and much larger and stronger than his sister. He did so and found that in her transfigured state, her weight was almost doubled. This experiment was conclusive and rendered it impossible to attribute her appearance to an optical illusion. Let us try to explain this fact, which at one time would have been called a miracle, but which we may now simply speak of as a phenomenon. Transfiguration in certain cases may be caused simply by a muscular contraction, which gives so new an expression to the face as to render the person no longer recognizable. We have often observed this in the case of certain somnambulists, but in such cases the transformation is not radical. A woman, for instance, may appear young or old, handsome or plain, but she will still appear as a woman, and she will not increase or diminish in weight. In the instance before us, it is quite evident that there was something more than this, something which only a knowledge of perispirit will enable us to explain. We assume, as a fundamental principle, that the spirit has the power of giving to his perispirit every kind of appearance, and that by modifications of its atomic conditions, he can give it temporary visibility, tangibility, and consequently opacity. We also lay it down as a rule that the perispirit of a person in the flesh, when partially separated from the body, can be made to undergo the same transformations, and that this change of state is effected by the combination of fluids to which we have so often referred. Let us then imagine the perispirit of a person in the flesh, not as separated from the body, but as radiating around the body, so as to envelop it like a vapor. In this state, the perispirit can be made to undergo the same modifications as if it were entirely separated from it. By causing the perispirit to lose its transparency, the body may be made to disappear and become invisible, being veiled, so to say, by the perispirit, as though surrounded by a mist. It may even change its aspect, become luminous, if such be the will, or in the power of the spirit. A second spirit, combining his own fluid with that of the former one, may substitute his own appearance for that of the former spirit, and so completely that the real body may be made to disappear under an exterior, fluidic envelope, the appearance of which may be changed indefinitely at the will of the spirit operators. Such appears to be the true cause of the strange and very rare phenomenon in question. As to the difference of weight, that may be explained in the same way as the change of weight in inert bodies. The intrinsic weight of the young lady's body was not changed, because there was no change in the amount of matter it contained. But her body was, for the time being, brought under the control of an exterior agent that was able to augment or to diminish its apparent weight, as we explained above. It is therefore probable that if the transfiguration had caused it to assume the aspect of a little child, the apparent weight of the body would have been proportionally diminished. We can understand, it may be objected, that a body may be made to assume the appearance of another body of the same dimensions, or even of a larger one, but how could it assume that of a smaller one, that of a little child, as has just been suggested? In such a case, would not the real body exceed the limits of the apparent body? We reply that the portion of the real body, which in such a case would be in excess of the apparent body, might easily be rendered invisible by spirit action. But we do not assert that this phenomenon has actually been produced. We only desire to show theoretically that both the size and the weight of the body might be made to undergo an apparent diminution. As to the phenomenon itself, we neither affirm nor deny its possibility. But should it occur and should no more satisfactory solution have been arrived at, our theory would show how it might have been produced. We must never forget that we are on the threshold of the subject, and that we have still as much to learn in regard to the laws of spirit manifestation as of all others. We might here touch on the singular phenomenon of the asnes, or ungenerated, which, however extraordinary it may appear, is no more supernatural than the other phenomena we have been considering. But having fully explained this subject in the Revue Spirit of February 1859, we think it unnecessary to reproduce that explanation here. We will merely add that it is a variety of the class of tangible apparitions, a peculiar state of certain spirits, enabling them to clothe themselves temporarily with a form so exactly resembling a body of flesh as to appear to be such to those about them. Chapter 8. Laboratory of the Invisible World. Spirit clothing, spontaneous formation of tangible objects, modification of the properties of matter, curative action of animal magnetism. We have already said that spirits sometimes appear in flowing draperies, sometimes in ordinary human clothes. The former appear to be the general costume of the spirit world. But it will naturally be asked, whence do spirits get their clothing? Clothing which is often precisely what they wore on earth, and comprising all the ordinary accessories of the toilet. It is certain that in dying they did not carry those objects away with them. Yet we see them before us, and we can touch them with our hands. Whence do they come? The problem has always been a puzzling one for observers. With many, it is simply a matter of curiosity, but it really involves a point of great importance. Our search after its solution has set us on the track of a general law, which is equally applicable to the spirit world and to the corporeal world, and without a knowledge of which it is impossible to explain the complicated phenomena referred to. In the case of a spirit who appears with the clothing he wore during life, we might explain the appearance as the result of an action of the spirit's memory, and as forming, so to say, a part of his individuality. But this could hardly be supposed to be the case as regards accessories, such, for instance, as the snuff-box of the old gentleman who visited the sick lady, as related above. And it is moreover to be remarked that in the case alluded to, the apparition was not that of a dead person, but of a living one, and that this same old gentleman, when he afterwards visited the lady in his material body, brought with him a snuff-box similar, in every respect, to that which had been used by his spirit. Where did this spirit find the snuff-box that was in his hand when he sat at the foot of the lady's bed? A question that might be repeated in regard to a great number of cases which we could instance, in which the spirits of deceased as well as of living persons have appeared, carrying in their hands various objects, such as sticks, pipes, lanterns, books, etc. It formerly occurred to us that inert bodies might possibly have their etherealized correspondence in the invisible world, and that the condensed matter which forms the objects of our world might have, in the spirit world, a corresponding quintessence, which our bodily senses are unable to perceive. This hypothesis was not devoid of probability, but it failed to account for all the facts that presented themselves, and of which one especially seemed to defy all our attempts at interpretation. Up to that time, there had occurred in our experience only instances of images or appearances, and although we had seen the perispirit could acquire the properties of matter and could become tangible, yet this tangibility had been only momentary, and the seemingly solid body thus produced had vanished like a shadow. That phenomenon was sufficiently extraordinary. But what was still more so was to see persistently solid matter produced by spirits, as has been done in a number of perfectly authentic cases, and among others in the phenomenon to which we have just referred, that of direct writing. We shall treat of that phenomenon in a special chapter, but as it is intimately connected with the point we are now considering, we will, before proceeding farther, offer a few remarks in regard to it. Direct writing, or pneumatography, is that which is produced spontaneously, that is to say, without the help of the medium's hand or a pencil. It is enough to provide a clean sheet of paper, which can be done with all due precaution so as to assure ourselves that we have not been made the victims of trickery, to fold it up, and to put it in a drawer or upon a table. After which, if conditions are favorable, we find, and perhaps in a short time, various signs, letters, and even long communications traced upon the paper, usually with some black or gray substance having the appearance of lead or crayon, sometimes as though traced with a red pencil, sometimes again as though written with common ink or even with printer's ink. When a pencil is placed with the paper, we may suppose that the spirit has used it for writing. But when the paper only is left, without anything else, it is evident that the writing is done with some sort of material produced by the spirits themselves. But where do the spirits find that material? To this question the snuff-box above mentioned was the means of procuring for us an answer which appears to us to be conclusive. It was the spirit of St. Louis who gave us, in reference to this problem, the solution referred to, and which is embodied in the following dialogue. We have laid before you the case of an apparition of the spirit of a person in the flesh. This spirit carried a snuff-box and took snuff. Did he feel the sensation which we feel in this act? No. This snuff-box looked exactly like the one which he habitually used. But that real snuff-box was in his house. What was the snuff-box seen in his hand? An appearance. It was made to occur, in order both that the circumstance might be remarked, as in fact was the case, and also that the apparition might not be taken for an hallucination produced by the ill health of the seer. The spirit desired that the lady should be convinced of the reality of his presence. He therefore assumed all the appearances of reality. You say it was an appearance, but there is nothing real in an appearance, which is a sort of optical illusion. What we want to know is whether this snuff-box was only an image without reality, or whether there was something of materiality in its nature. Certainly there was something material in its nature. It is by the aid of this materiality that the paraspirit takes on the appearance of clothes like those which the spirit wore while on earth. It is evident that we must here understand the word appearance in the sense of aspect or imitation. The snuff-box in its reality was not there. What the spirit held in his hand was only its representative. It was therefore an appearance as compared with the original, although formed of a sort of matter. Experience teaches us not to take too literally every expression employed by spirits. By interpreting their expressions according to our own ideas, we run the risk of falling into serious errors, and we should therefore endeavor to ascertain the real meaning of their words, whenever these present the least ambiguity, as the spirits themselves constantly recommend us to do. For instance, without the explanation just given, the word appearance, frequently recurring in analogous cases, might give rise to false interpretations. Can it be that inert matter has its double? Can it be that in the invisible world there is an essential matter, which assumes the forms of the objects of our world? In other words, have the objects of the terrestrial world their ethereal counterparts in the invisible world, as spirits are the counterparts of men? That is not the case. A spirit exerts over the material elements everywhere disseminated through space and in your atmosphere a power such as you are far from suspecting. He can, by his will, concentrate those elements and give them the apparent form required for his projects. Remark: the foregoing question, as will have been seen, was the translation of our own thought that is to say, of the idea that we had formed in regard to the nature of those objects. If the answer had been, as some may surmise, the reflection of our own thought, we should have received the confirmation of our own supposition, instead of receiving an explanation altogether contrary to the one which we had imagined. We repeat our question categorically to avoid all ambiguity, and we again ask you, are the clothes worn by spirits something real? It appears to me that my previous answer replies to your question. Do you not know that the paraspirit itself is something real? Your explanation seems to imply that spirits transform ethereal matter at pleasure, and that consequently, with regard to the snuff box, for example, the spirit did not find it ready-made, but made it himself, at the moment that he wanted it by an act of his will, and that he was able afterwards to unmake it. It must therefore be the same in regard to all other objects seen with spirits, whether clothes, jewels, or what not. Evidently so. The snuff-box in question was visible for the lady, and so plainly as to make her think it real. Could the spirit have made it tangible for her? He could have done so. Could the lady have taken the box in her hands, and in that case would it still have appeared to her to be a real snuff-box? Yes. If she had opened it, she would probably have found snuff there. If she had taken a pinch, would it have made her sneeze? Yes. A spirit then cannot only produce a form, but can give to that form the special properties of the object thus imitated? Yes, if he so wills it. It was in virtue of this principle that I gave affirmative replies to your preceding questions. You will have abundant proofs of the powerful action exercised by spirit over matter, proofs such as you little imagine at present, as I have already told you. If a spirit had compounded a poisonous substance and some human being should swallow it, would the latter be poisoned? Such a compound could be made, but no spirit could make it, for he would not be permitted to do so. Could he fabricate a substance that would be beneficial to health and capable of curing a malady? Has such a thing ever been done? Yes, very often. If so, he could no doubt as easily fabricate all elementary substance. Suppose he made some fruit or any other article of food, would it appease a man's hunger if he ate it? Yes, yes, but do not try so hard to find out what it is so easy to understand. A ray of sunlight suffices to enable your gross organs to perceive the material particles which fill the space in the midst of which you live. Do you not know that the air contains the vapor of water? Condense that vapor and you bring it back to its normal state of water. Deprive it of heat, and lo, the impalpable and invisible molecules of that vapor have been changed into a solid body. And how many other substances are there from which chemists will produce marvels even more astonishing? But spirits possess instruments more perfect than yours, their will, and the divine permission. Remark: this question of the appeasing of hunger by substances of character we are considering is very important. If a substance has only temporary existence and properties, and is, so to say, only a sort of pretense, how can it appease the hunger of the material body? This substance, by its contact with the stomach, produces a sensation of satiety, but not the satiety which results from filling the stomach with natural food. If such a substance can act on the bodily economy so as to modify a morbid state, it can just as well act on the stomach so as to produce the sensation resulting from the satisfaction of appetite. Nevertheless, those whose business it is to provide us with drugs and with dinners need not be jealous of spirit power, nor imagine that the denizens of the other worlds are coming into competition with them. Such cases of spirit action are rare, exceptional, and independent of the human will. Otherwise, we should really be fed and cured too cheaply. Could objects that have thus been formed by spirits, rendered tangible by their will, obtain the attributes of permanence and stability, and be made use of by men? The thing is possible in itself, but it is never done. It would be an infringement of the laws of natural order in the sphere of human life. Do all spirits possess the power of producing tangible objects in the same degree? The higher the spirit, the more easily does he obtain this effect. But it also depends upon circumstances. Inferior spirits sometimes have this power. Does a spirit always comprehend the way in which he makes his garments and the other objects he shows us? No, he often determines their formation by an instinctive act which, if he is not sufficiently enlightened, he does not understand. If a spirit can draw from the universal element the materials for making all sorts of things, and if he can give to each of those things a temporary reality and peculiar properties, it is evident that he can draw from this element the matter necessary for writing, and your explanations would therefore appear to give us the key to the phenomenon of direct writing. Is that so? Ah, you've found that out at last, have you? Remark. All our preliminary questions have been put with a view to arriving at the solution just given. The Spirit's exclamation proves that he had read our thought. If the matter employed by the Spirit be not permanent, how is it that the traces of direct writing do not disappear? Do not strain at words. I did not say that spirit formations are never permanent. I have been speaking of voluminous objects, but writing consists merely of signs that have been traced, and which it may be useful to preserve. They are accordingly preserved. I meant to say that the objects thus composed by spirits could not become objects of common use, because there is in them no real aggregation of matter such as there is in your solid bodies. The explanation just given may be thus summed up. Spirit has the power of acting upon matter. Individual spirits draw from the universal cosmic matter the elements necessary to form, according to their wishes, objects having the appearance of the various bodies existing on the earth. They can also, by their will, effect a particular transformation of elementary matter which gives to it certain determinate properties. This faculty is inherent in the nature of spirits, who often exercise it instinctively when necessary, without being able to explain how they do it. Objects formed by a spirit have only a temporary existence subordinate to his will, or to the necessity of the case. He can make and unmake them at pleasure. These objects may, in certain cases, be made to present us all the appearances of reality. That is to say, they may become, for the time being, visible and tangible. In such action there is formation, but not creation, for no spirit can evolve something out of nothing. The existence of a unique elementary matter is now generally admitted by science and is confirmed, as we have seen, by spirits. This matter gives birth to all natural bodies, and by the transformations which it undergoes, it also produces the different properties of those bodies. It is thus that a salutary substance may be rendered poisonous by a simple modification of its molecular arrangement, a fact of which chemistry offers a vast number of examples. As everyone knows, two substances, each of which is in itself innocuous, may produce, when combined in certain proportions, a new substance, which is deleterious. One equivalent of oxygen and two equivalents of hydrogen, both in themselves inoffensive bodies, combined become water. Add another equivalent of oxygen, and you obtain a corrosive liquid. Moreover, without changing the proportions of chemical equivalents, a mere change in the mode of their molecular aggregation is often sufficient to change the properties of a substance. Thus, an opaque body may be made transparent, and vice versa. Since a spirit possesses in his will so powerful an instrument of action upon the elements of matter, it is easy to understand that they may be able not only to form substances, but also to change the property of substances, the spirit's will, in such cases, producing the effect of a chemical reagent. This theory explains a fact well known in mesmerism, but hitherto unexplained, that of the changes effected in the properties of water by the action of the will. The acting spirit in this case is that of the mesmerizer, who is frequently assisted by a disincarnate spirit, and who effects a transformation of the water by means of what, for want of a better term, we call the animalized magnetic fluid, which, as we have said, is the substance that approaches most nearly to the cosmic matter or universal element. If the mesmerizer can modify the properties of water, he can also effect an analogous modification of the fluids of the human organism. Hence, the curative effect of the mesmeric action when properly directed. We know the important part that is played by the will in the production of all the phenomena of animal magnetism. But how are we to explain the action of so subtle an agent on matter? The will is not a being, not a substance. It is not even a property of the most etherealized matter. True, but will is the essential attribute of the spirit, that is to say, of the thinking being. With the aid of this instrument, a spirit acts on the elements of matter, and by the same action exercised on the elements of the compound bodies formed from that matter, he is able to modify the properties of those bodies. Will is the attribute of the incarnate spirit, as well as of the disincarnate spirit wandering in space. Hence the power of the mesmerizer, a power which, as we know, is proportioned to the force of his will. The incarnate spirit, being able to act upon elementary matter, he can also vary its properties within certain limits. We are thus enabled to explain the faculty of healing by the position of hands, a faculty possessed by many persons in a greater or less degree. Chapter 9. Haunted Places. The spontaneous manifestations which have occurred in all times, and the persistence of some spirits in giving ostensible evidence of their presence in certain localities, are the source of the belief in haunted places. The following spirit answers were elicited by our questions on this subject. Do spirits attach themselves to persons only, or do they also attach themselves to things? That depends upon their elevation. Certain spirits may attach themselves to terrestrial objects. Misers, for instance, who have hidden their hoards and who are not sufficiently dematerialized, may still watch over and guard them. Are there any places for which errant spirits have a predilection? Spirits who are no longer earthbound go where they find those whom they love, for they are attracted rather by persons than by material things. Some of them may, for a time, retain a preference for certain places, but those who do so are spirits of inferior advancement. Since the attachment of spirits for localities is a sign of inferiority, is it also a proof that they are evil spirits? Assuredly not. A spirit may be but little advanced and yet not be a bad spirit. Is it not so among men? Is there any foundation for the belief that spirits frequent ruins by preference? No, spirits go to such places just as they go everywhere else. But the lugubrious aspect of certain places strikes the human imagination and leads you to attribute to the presence of spirits what is often merely a natural effect. How often does fear turn the shadow of a tree into a phantom, or mistake the cry of an animal, or the murmuring of the wind, for the wail of a ghost? Spirits like the presence of men, and usually seek out inhabited places rather than solitary ones. Nevertheless, knowing what we do of the diversity of character among spirits, may we not suppose that there are misanthropes among them, preferring solitude to society? Have I not already answered you on this point by saying that spirits may seek out desolate places as well as all other places? If some of them live alone, they do so because it pleases them. But this is no reason why spirits should necessarily prefer ruins, and assuredly there are many more spirits in cities and inhabited dwellings than in solitary places. Popular beliefs have generally a foundation of truth. What is the origin of belief in haunted places? It has grown out of men's instinctive belief in spirit manifestations, a belief that has prevailed in all ages of the world. But, as I said just now, the aspect of lugubrious places strikes the imagination, and men have naturally located in such places the beings whom they have regarded as supernatural. This superstitious belief is upheld by the fanciful imaginings of your poets, as well as by the nonsensical stories told to you in the nursery. Spirits who assemble together, have they any preferences in regard to days and hours of meeting? No, days and hours are measurements of time for the use of men, and for the needs of corporeal life. Spirits have no need of any such measurements and take very little heed of them. What is the origin of the idea that spirits come by preference at night? The impression produced on the imagination by darkness and silence. All such ideas are superstitions that a rational knowledge of spiritism will destroy. It is the same with respect to the notion held by some people that certain days and hours are more propitious than others. The influence of midnight has no existence except in storybooks. If this be the case, how is it that many spirits announce their arrival and manifestations for midnight or for certain predetermined days, as Friday, for example? Such spirits only trifle with your credulity. In the same way, there are spirits who declare themselves to be the devil or give themselves some other diabolical or fantastic name. Show them that you are not to be taken in by them, and you will hear no more of such absurdities. Do spirits come back by preference to the burial place of their body? The body was but a garment. They care no more for their fleshly envelope in which they have had to suffer than the prisoner cares for his chains. The memory of those they love is the only thing they value. Are prayers offered up at their graves especially pleasing to them, and do they attract them more than prayers would do elsewhere? Prayer is an evocation which attracts a spirit, as you know. The more fervent and sincere the prayer, the greater the effect it produces. And therefore the sight of a venerated tomb may serve to concentrate the thought of him who prays, while the interest attached to it, as to any other treasured relic, being a testimony of affection offered to the spirit, he is always attracted and touched thereby. But in all such cases, it is the thought which acts on a spirit, and not any material objects. For these have less influence on the spirit who is prayed for than on the person who prays, and whose attention they serve to concentrate and intensify. That being the case, the belief in haunted places would appear to be not absolutely groundless. We have told you that there are spirits who are attracted by material things. Such spirits may also be attracted to certain places, and may even take up their abode in them, until the cessation of the circumstances that have attracted them thither. What are the circumstances that may attract spirits to a given place? Their sympathy with persons who frequent that place, and in some cases the desire to communicate with them. Their motives, however, are not always so praiseworthy. Inferior spirits may desire to revenge themselves on persons against whom they have a grudge. Sojourn in a fixed locality may be also a punishment inflicted on them, especially if they have committed a crime there, so that the crime may be constantly before their eyes. Have haunted places in all cases been the former habitation of the spirits who haunt them? Not in all cases. If the former inhabitant be an elevated spirit, he will no more hold to his old house than to his old body. Spirits who haunt certain localities, when not attracted to them by sympathy for certain persons, are often only actuated by caprice. Can they attach themselves to certain places in order to act as protectors of particular persons or families? Assuredly, if they are good spirits. But in that case, they never manifest their presence by disagreeable actions. Is there any truth in the legend of the White Lady? It is as true as are 1,000 other facts of a similar nature. Is it rational to dread places that are reputed to be haunted by spirits? No. The spirits who haunt certain places and make disturbances there do so to amuse themselves at the expense of the credulous and the cowardly, rather than for any evil purpose. Besides, you must not forget that there are spirits everywhere, and that wherever you may be, you have them incessantly around you, even in the quietest houses. They only appear to haunt certain habitations because they find in them the conditions necessary for manifesting their presence. Is there any method of expelling them? Yes, but most frequently what people do for that purpose attracts rather than repels them. The best way of expelling bad spirits is to attract good ones by doing all the good you can. The bad ones will then go away, for good and evil are incompatible. Be always good and you will have only good spirits about you. Many very good people, however, are greatly annoyed by the persecutions of bad spirits. If persons thus annoyed are really good, the annoyance may be a trial to exercise their patience and to excite them to greater goodness. Can evil spirits be driven from haunted places by exorcisms? Have you often seen exorcisms successful? Have you not, on the contrary, often found that they increased the disturbances? Mischievous spirits are often amused at being mistaken for the devil. Spirits who come without any evil intention may also manifest their presence by rendering themselves visible or by noises, but the noises they make never degenerate into racket. They are often suffering spirits, whom you may relieve by praying for them. They are sometimes kindly spirits, who desire to show you that they are near you, or they may be frivolous spirits, who are only in sport. Since these who disturb you are, almost invariably, spirits in search of amusement, the best thing to do is laugh at them, and they will tire of playing pranks, if they see that they neither frighten nor vex you. From these explanations, we learn that there are spirits who attach themselves to localities and remain in them by preference, without having any motive for manifesting their presence to us. Any place may be the sojourn of a spirit, either from a preference on his part, or from it having been assigned to him as a temporary abode without his ever producing a manifestation of any kind. And this even in the case of those who have led an evil life. The spirits who attach themselves to localities or to material things are never of superior advancement. But although not of a high degree, they are not necessarily wicked nor animated by hostile intentions. Such inmates are sometimes even useful, for when they take an interest in the people of the house, they often render them various services. Chapter 10. Nature of Spirit Communications. Coarse, frivolous, serious, and instructive communications. We have shown that every effect implying as its cause an act of free will, however insignificant, proves thereby the action of an intelligent cause, and that therefore the mere movement of a table, if it answers our thoughts or gives proof of intention, must be regarded as an intelligent manifestation. If all manifestations were confined within such limits, the subject would have little interest for us, because although it would still be something to be assured that the phenomena in question are not merely physical, they would be of little practical value. But it is quite otherwise when the manifestation of intelligence acquires a development which permits of a regular and consecutive exchange of thoughts. For in such cases, the phenomena elicited can no longer be regarded merely as intelligent manifestations, but assume the far more important character of communications. The means now at our disposal permit of our obtaining from spirits communications as extensive, explicit, and rapid as those which we can obtain from men. If we bear in mind the infinite variety that exists among spirits, under the double aspect of intelligence and of morality, we perceive that a corresponding diversity must exist in their communications, which necessarily reflect the elevation or the backwardness of spirits by whom they are made, and that the quality of their ideas, their degree of knowledge or of ignorance, their virtues, and their vices will be evidenced by the communications which emanate from them, and which will no more resemble each other than do among men those of the savage and the most enlightened European. But all the shades presented by spirit communications may be grouped into four principal categories. According to their most salient characteristics, they may be designated as coarse, frivolous, serious, and instructive. Coarse communications are those which shock propriety. They can only proceed from spirits at a very low stage of development, still soiled with the impurities of materiality. They are in no way different from the utterances of coarse and vicious men, and are revolting to everyone who has the least delicacy of sentiment, being trivial, obscene, insolent, arrogant, malevolent, or even impious, according to the character of the spirits who make them. Frivolous communications emanate from spirits who are frivolous, mischievous, and tricksy, rather than wicked, and who attach no importance to what they say. As there is nothing unseemly in their communications, they amuse persons who they take pleasure in futile talk. Such spirits, however, sometimes come down upon their interlocutors with clever, biting sallies, throwing on, in the midst of commonplace jokes, hard truths, which often hit the mark. These frivolous spirits are around us in swarms, and take every opportunity of mixing themselves up with the communications of other spirits. Having no respect for veracity, they take a mischievous pleasure in hoaxing those who have the weakness or presumption to believe them. Those who amuse themselves with such communications naturally give access to foolish and deceptive spirits, while at the same time they repel serious ones, who, like serious men, avoid the society of the unreasoning and the giddy. Serious communications are distinguished by the gravity of the subjects of which they treat and by the seriousness of their tone. Every communication exempt from coarseness and frivolity, having in view a useful object, even though it may be one of merely private interest, may be classed as serious. But nevertheless, it may not be exempt from error. Serious spirits are not all equally enlightened. There are many things of which they are ignorant and concerning which they may be mistaken. For this reason, spirits who are really superior constantly advise us to submit all communications to the test of examination and of reason. It is therefore imperatively necessary to distinguish between communications that are seriously true and communications that are seriously false. But this is not always easy, for it is often under the guise of seriousness that presumptuous and superficial spirits seek to foist upon us their erroneous ideas and absurd theories, unscrupulously assuming the most honored and even the most venerated names, in order the more effectually to impose upon us a method of deception which constitutes one of the most dangerous stumbling blocks of practical spiritism. We shall return to this subject, of which we shall treat farther on with all the minuteness that its importance demands. We shall then point out the means of guarding ourselves against false communications. Instructive communications are those which are not only serious, but also convey the teachings of superior spirits on points of science, morality, philosophy, etc. They are more or less profound in proportion to the elevation and dematerialization of the communicating spirit. In order to reap benefit from such communications, they must be followed up with regularity and perseverance. Serious spirits attach themselves to those who desire instruction and assist them, but those who only see in these manifestations a source of passing amusement are left by them to the companionship of spirits as frivolous as themselves. It is only by the regularity and frequency of such communications that we can appreciate the moral and intellectual worth of the spirits with whom we thus hold converse, and the degree of confidence which they deserve. If experience is necessary in order to form a true estimate of men, it is, if possible, still more necessary in forming a true estimate of spirits. In applying these communications, the qualification of instructive, we imply that they are true. For what is not true can never be instructive, though expressed in the most imposing language. We therefore do not include in this category certain teachings which have nothing serious about them but their high-flown and pretentious style, by which spirits possessed of more presumption than philosophy endeavor to mislead. But such spirits, being unable to disguise their shallowness, are incapable of keeping up their false assumptions for any length of time. They soon betray their weak side if we continue to converse with them and ply them with questions which compel them to show their incompetency. The means of communicating with spirits are numerous and varied. As spirits act on all our organs and on all our senses, they are able to manifest themselves to the sight by apparitions, to the touch by impressions, occult or visible on our bodily frame, to the hearing by sounds, and to the sense of smell by odors coming from we know not whence. The last mode of manifestation, although real, is undoubtedly the most uncertain of all, owing to the various sources of air with which it is environed, and we therefore not pause to examine it more fully, but proceed at once to consider the principal means of obtaining communications, in other words, of establishing a regular and consecutive exchange of ideas with spirits. The means of doing this are, first, raps and tiltings; second, speech; third, writing. We will examine each of these in a special chapter. Chapter 11. Semitology and Typology. The language of signs, raps, and tiltings. Alphabetical typology. The first intelligent manifestations were obtained by raps and tiltings or typology, from the Greek, I strike. This primitive method, indicative of the infancy of the art of communication, was a very narrow application of typology, and those who employed it were restricted in their communications to monosyllabical replies to a mere yes or no, signified by the number of raps previously agreed upon as the representation of those words. As already observed, this method was subsequently improved upon. Answers were obtained in two ways: with the aid of mediums possessing the aptitude required for physical manifestations, by the movement of the table, and by raps which seemed to be produced in the substance of the wood, in the walls, or in the air. The first of these consists in the movement of the table, which tilts itself up on one side, and then falls back, striking the floor with its foot. To attain this effect, the medium has only to place his hands on the edge of the table. But if he desires to communicate with a particular spirit, he must evoke him, as otherwise he will have the first comer who happens to present himself, or the spirit who is in the habit of coming. It having been agreed, for example, that 1 tilt shall mean no and 3 tilts yes, or any other numbers, this being indifferent, the spirit is asked the desired questions. We shall hereafter allude to the questions which it is wise to abstain from asking. The inconvenience of typology consists in the brevity of the answers obtained, and the difficulty of forming the questions in such a way as to be answerable by yes or no. Supposing we ask the spirit, "What do you want?" He could only answer us by an entire sentence. It is therefore necessary to say, "Do you desire such and such a thing?" "No." "Do you desire some other thing?" "Yes," and so on. We would remark that in the employment of this method of communication, the spirit frequently has recourse to a sort of mimicry. That is to say, he expresses the energy of affirmation or negation by the force and character of the tilts or raps. He often expresses in the same way the nature of the sentiments which animate him: violence by abruptness of movement, anger and impatience by striking hard and repeated blows, like someone who stamps angrily on the ground. Occasionally he upsets the table. A polite and kindly spirit, at the beginning and the end of a séance, moves the table as though making a bow. If desirous of addressing himself directly to one of the persons present, he pushes the table towards him, gently or roughly, according to the sentiment by which he is animated. This is, properly speaking, semitology, or the language of signs, as typology is the language of raps. Here is a remarkable example of spontaneous semitology. A gentleman of our acquaintance, being one day in his drawing-room, where several persons were holding a séance, received a letter from us. While he was reading it, the little table used by him for spiritist experimentation suddenly moved up to him. Having finished reading our letter, he went towards another table at the farther end of the room and laid the letter upon it. The little table followed him and went up to the table upon which he had laid the letter. Surprised at this occurrence, our friend bethought him that there must be some connection between the movements of the little table and the letter. He inquired the name of the spirit who had moved the table, and a name was given which is that of our familiar spirit. The gentleman having informed us of this circumstance, we in our turn begged the spirit to tell us the motive of the visit he had made to our friend, whereupon this reply was given: "It is natural that I should go and see those with whom you are in communication, in order that I may, if necessary, give to them, as well as to you, such advice as may be useful." It is evident that the spirit wished to attract the attention of the gentleman in question, and sought for some means of manifesting his presence. A dumb man would hardly have managed better. Typology was speedily improved by the adoption of a more extended method of communication, which we may designate as alphabetical typology. This consists in designating the letters of the alphabet by tilts, words, sentences, and even long communications are thus obtained. According to one method, the table makes as many tilts as there are needed to indicate each letter. That is to say, 1 tilt for A, 2 for B, and so on. Meanwhile, someone of the party writes down each letter as indicated by the number of tilts. When the spirit has finished, he makes some sign, previously agreed upon, to indicate the fact. This mode of proceeding, as will be readily understood, is extremely tedious and requires an enormous amount of time for obtaining communications of any length. But practice soon suggested various abbreviative methods more rapid than the above. That which is generally employed consists in having the letters of the alphabet and the numerals written on a sheet of paper or cardboard. The medium being seated at the table, some member of the circle runs a pencil or other pointer along the letters when words are wanted, along the ciphers when numbers are wanted. When the pencil reaches the desired letter or cipher, the table gives a tilt, and the letter or cipher thus indicated is written down. the person who holds the pencil going through the same operation for the next letter, and so on. If a mistake occurs in regard to a letter, the spirit gives notice of the fact by several tilts, and the pencil is again taken through the alphabet. In this way, by dint of practice, it is possible to get on with tolerable quickness. The other application of typology is by raps produced in the wood of the table without any movement occurring in the latter, and all that we have just described in reference to the tilting of the table is equally applicable to the obtaining of communications by raps. All mediums are not equally successful in obtaining both kinds of typology, for some can only obtain tilts, while others can only obtain raps. Most mediums, however, by perseverance can eventually succeed in obtaining raps, which have the double advantage of being not only more rapid, but also less open to suspicion than the tiltings, which may be attributed to voluntary or involuntary pressure. It is true that the raps also can be imitated by untruthful mediums, but the best things may be counterfeited, a fact which proves nothing against their reality. But however improved, this way of proceeding can never attain the ease and rapidity of writing, and consequently the old methods of tilting and rapping are now less frequently employed. The old way is nevertheless very interesting as a phenomenon, especially for beginners, and it has the special advantage of being independent of the medium's mind. By the old method, too, answers are often obtained, so unexpected, so apt and pertinent, that one must be prejudiced indeed to reject the evidence thus afforded, and which is often an effectual means of conviction. But neither by this method, nor by any other, can spirits be made to yield to the caprices of mere curiosity, or forced to answer misplaced or indiscreet questions. In order to render spirit communications independent of the medium's mind, various instruments have been devised. One of these is a sort of dial plate on which the letters of the alphabet are arranged like those of the dial of the electric telegraph. A movable needle, set in motion through the medium's influence, with the aid of a conducting thread and pulley, points out the letters. We cannot help thinking, however, that independence of the medium's thought is ensured as well by the raps, and that this independence is proved more conclusively by the unexpectedness and pertinence of the answers than by all the mechanical contrivances yet invented for this purpose. Moreover, the incredulous, always on the lookout for wires and machinery, are more inclined to suspect deception in connection with any special mechanical arrangements than with the bare table, devoid of all accessories. A more simple contrivance, but one open to abuse, as we shall see in the chapter on frauds, is the one devised by Madame Émile de Girardin, and by which she obtained numerous and interesting communications. For that lady, accomplished and clever as she was, had the weakness to believe in spirits and their manifestations. The instruments alluded to consist of a little table with a movable top, 18 inches in diameter, turning freely on an axle like a wheel. On its edge are traced, as upon a dial plate, the letters of the alphabet, the numerals, and the words yes and no. In the center is fixed a needle. The medium places his fingers on this table, which turns and stops when the desired letter is brought under the needle, the letters thus indicated being written down one after the other. Words and phrases are obtained, often with great rapidity. It is to be remarked that the top of the little table does not turn round under the fingers, but that the fingers remain in their place and follow the movement of the table. A powerful medium might probably obtain an independent movement, in which case the experiment would be more conclusive because less open to the possibility of trickery. Let us here correct the widespread error which confounds all spirits who communicate by tilts or raps with rapping spirits. Typology is a means of communication like any other, and is no more unworthy of elevated spirits than writing or speaking. All spirits, good or bad, may employ this method as well as any other. What characterizes superior spirits is the elevation of their thought, and not the instrument they may use for its transmission. They no doubt prefer the more convenient and rapid methods, but in the absence of these they willingly employ the table, as is shown by the fact that some of the grandest communications yet received have been made in this way. If we do not usually employ the table, it is not because we despise it, but merely because, as a phenomenon, it has given us all that it was capable of giving. so that it can add nothing to our convictions, while the length of the communications we receive has compelled us to have recourse to more expeditious methods. All spirits who rap are not then what are commonly called rapping spirits, which designation should be reserved for those who may be styled professional rappers, and who take pleasure in going their rounds, amusing some and boring others. Some things are sometimes said by them, but never anything really profound. It would be a loss of time to ask scientific or philosophical questions of ignorant pretenders who are classed by higher spirits as the quacks and mountebanks of the spirit world. They are, nevertheless, often employed by superior spirits as their instruments for the production of physical manifestations. Chapter 12. Pneumatography or direct writing. Pneumatophony or direct spirit sounds. Direct writing. Pneumatography is writing produced directly by a spirit, without any intermediary. It differs from psychography, which is the transmission of a spirit's thought by the writing of the medium's hand. Wonderful as is the phenomenon of direct writing, it is nevertheless a fully proved and incontestable fact. If the theoretic teachings of Spiritism are required to enable us to account for the occurrence of spirit phenomena in general, they are even more necessary in regard to this particular phenomenon, which may well appear supernatural to those who are unacquainted with those teachings, but which, with their aid, are easily explicable. When this phenomena was first observed, the predominant feeling in regard to it was that of superstition. The idea of trickery with the aid of certain inks which, at first invisible, become subsequently visible, was in everybody's thoughts. We cannot affirm that such deception has never been practiced. On the contrary, we are convinced that some persons, from mercenary motives and others from vanity and to acquire the reputation of being powerful mediums, have, in too many instances, employed deceptions of various kinds. But it would be absurd to conclude that because a phenomenon can be imitated, the phenomenon itself does not occur. Has not ingenuity succeeded in imitating the lucidity of a somnambulist, and so cleverly as to make deception appear a reality? And because this feat of charlatanism has had a run at fairs, are we therefore to conclude that there are no real somnambulists? Because some dealers sell adulterated wine, are we to assert that no pure wine is to be had? It is the same with direct writing. The precautions for making sure of the reality of the fact are simple and easy. And thanks to the employment or those precautions, the reality of this phenomenon is no longer a matter of doubt. The possibility of writing without any human intermediary being now proved to be one of the attributes of a spirit, and spirits have always existed and having always produced the various phenomena with which we are now acquainted, it follows that they must have produced direct writing in ancient times, as well as at the present day. And we are thus enabled to explain the apparition on the wall of Belshazzar's palace. The Middle Ages, so fertile in occult prodigies, which it was sought to smother in the ashes of the stake, must also have witnessed the phenomenon of direct writing. It was probably from a knowledge of the modifications which spirits can effect in matter that the alchemists derived their belief in the transmutation of metals. But whatever partial knowledge of spirit action may have been arrived at in the past, it is only in these latter days, and since the generalization of the order of facts we are considering, that direct spirit writing has attracted serious attention. The subject was first brought forward in Europe by Baron Guldenstub in his very interesting work on this subject, containing a great number of facsimiles of direct spirit writing obtained by him. The phenomenon in question, however, had been known in America some time before and has since occurred through several other mediums. Direct writing is often obtained, like most of the other non-spontaneous manifestations, through meditation, prayer, and evocation, and has been often produced in churches, on tombs, and at the foot of the statues or images of the personages evoked. But it is evident that observances in localities have no other influence than that of inducing deeper feeling and a more intense concentration of thought on the part of the medium and those about him, for the experience has shown that it may be obtained equally well under other circumstances and in other places, and even on an ordinary table, when sought for by those who combine the requisite moral conditions with the special medianimic faculty required for the production of the phenomenon. It was at first supposed to be necessary in order to obtain direct spirit writing to place a pencil with the paper on which the spirit was to write. And as it is known that spirits can move, displace, and take hold of objects, it was inferred that they employed the pencil in producing the writing. But the presence of a pencil was soon found to be unnecessary. A blank sheet of paper, whether folded or not, is immaterial, has often been found to contain writing executed in the course of a few minutes or moments upon its surface. By the abstraction of the pencil, the character of the resulting manifestation is radically changed, and we are introduced to an entirely new order of phenomena. For the words thus produced are written with some sort of substance, and this substance, if not provided by us for the spirit, must necessarily be a product of his own, something which he himself composed or brought. If so, what is it, and whence did he get it? Such is the problem of which we have now to indicate the solution. If the reader will refer to the explanations given in our 8th chapter, he will find this phenomenon fully explained, with the aid of the principles therein laid down. We see that a spirit in producing direct writing does not use either our substances or our implements, but fabricates for himself the substance and the implements which he needs, drawing his materials from the primitive universal element and causing them, by his will, to undergo the necessary modifications for the production of the desired effect. He can therefore fabricate crayons of various colors, printing ink or common ink, or even typographic characters sufficiently firm in texture to give relief to his imitation of printing, examples of all of which operations have been seen by us. The daughter of a friend of ours, a child of only 13 years of age, has frequently obtained entire pages of direct writing produced with a substance resembling pastel. Such is the result to which we have been led by the study of the phenomenon of the snuff-box, to which we devoted much time and patience, because we saw that it offered the opportunity of ascertaining one of the fundamental laws of spirit life, the knowledge of which would also elucidate more than one of the mysteries of the visible world. It is thus that light may be obtained from a careful examination of the simplest facts, provided that we do not confine ourselves to looking merely for effects, without seeking for their causes. If our conviction of the reality of the modern manifestations grows stronger day by day, it is because we understand what we believe, and if we desire to convince others of their reality, we must present the subject to them in such a way as that they, too, may understand it. As for the value of direct writing, we must admit that its chief utility has hitherto been the additional proof thus afforded of the intervention of an occult power in the production of phenomena appreciable by our senses, power which has found, in these species of writing, a new method of manifesting itself. Direct writing has been obtained in various ancient and modern languages, in hieroglyphics, etc., but the messages thus given have usually been short, this method of communication not having as yet acquired the continuity and rapidity of psychography or writing by the hand of the medium. Pneumatophony. Spirits produce not only noises and rappings, but cries of every kind, and vocal sounds imitating the human voice in rooms and in the open air, phenomena which we designate as pneumatophony, or spirit sounds. Our experience of the nature of spirits has led us to think that some of them, of an inferior order, delude themselves into the belief that they are talking as when in the flesh. We must be careful not to take all sounds, the cause of which we know not, or mere tingling of the ears for occult voices, any more than to share the silly fancy that when our ears tingle, someone is talking to us. Those tinglings, which have a pure physiological cause, are without meaning, while pneumatophonic sounds express thoughts, and thereby prove themselves to be due to an intelligent cause, and not to accident. We may lay it down as a rule that spirit intervention is only proved by intelligent manifestations. In all other cases there are 100 chances to 1, but what are taken for such are really due to fortuitous causes. It often happens that when we are asleep, we hear words, names, sometimes entire phrases pronounced with sufficient force and distinctness to waken us with the start. Although in some cases this may be a spirit manifestation, it is often attributable to the cause of which we treated in our remarks on hallucination. What is thus heard has usually no coherence, thus differing widely from spirit utterances heard when we are awake. For in such cases we can usually exchange thoughts with the speaker and enter into regular conversation with him. There are two very distinct ways in which spirit sounds are perceived. They are sometimes heard by a sort of interior hearing, in which case, although the words heard are clear and distinct, they are not of a physical nature. At other times, these voices are perceived as something exterior to ourselves, and appear to be as distinctly articulated as though spoken by a person at our side. However produced, the phenomenon of pneumatophony is almost always spontaneous and can rarely be obtained by evocation. Chapter 13. Psychography. Direct psychography, planchettes, etc. Direct or manual psychography. The development of the Spiritist movement has been unusually rapid, for although we are separated only by a few years from its primitive manifestations, so often contemptuously alluded to as table-turning, we are already enabled to converse with spirits as easily and rapidly as men converse with each other, and by the very same means, by speech and by writing. Writing has the special advantage of furnishing a permanent evidence of the action of occult power, one which we are able to preserve as we preserve letters received from correspondents in the flesh. As previously remarked, the first method employed was the use of small baskets and planchettes with a pencil attached to them, which method of correspondence we will now briefly describe. We have said that persons endowed with a special aptitude can produce a rotary movement of a table or other object. Let us suppose, in lieu of a table, that we employ the small basket or planchette alluded to in the beginning of the present work, with a pencil firmly fixed thereto, in such a manner as that the pencil will write upon a sheet of paper placed beneath it, if the basket or planchette be made to move. The pencil tracing scrawls and on-meeting marks, making attempts at writing or writing legible and intelligible words. If the spirit evoked is willing to communicate, he will no longer answer by raps, but by written communications. Several other contrivances have been invented by means of which communications of many pages may be obtained as rapidly as those written with the hand. The acting intelligence often manifests itself by other signs equally conclusive, as with the pencil, having reached the bottom of the page, makes a spontaneous movement to turn over the leaf, or is moved back over the same page or over several pages to some preceding word or passage, which it then underlines or effaces. Sometimes the pencil points to some one of the company, to whom a message is especially addressed. Sometimes it says yes or no, by means as expressive as our movements of head or hand. Sometimes in expressing anger or impatience, it strikes repeatedly on the table and often so violently as to break its point. In using these appliances, it is almost always necessary that two persons should concur, but it is not necessary that the second person should have the medianimic faculty, his concurrence being only needed to maintain the equilibrium of the instrument and to lessen the medium's fatigue. We may designate writing thus obtained as indirect psychography, in contradistinction to direct or manual psychography obtained by the hand of the medium himself. In the last named operation, the communicating spirit acts directly upon the medium. The medium, under this influence, holds the pencil as though about to write, when his hand will be made to write, and often without his knowing what he is writing. In all cases of spirit writing, it is not that the planchette or the pencil becomes intelligent, for they are merely the instruments of an intelligence. Whatever the instrument employed, it is only a pencil holder, an intermediary between the hand and the pencil. Suppress the intermediary, put the pencil into the medium's hand, and you will have the same result, but much more simply obtained, since the medium will now write as he does in his normal state. Thus, everyone who writes with a planchette or other instrument can obtain direct writing. Of all means of communication, writing with the hands, sometimes designated as involuntary writing, is the simplest, easiest, and most convenient because it requires no preparation and is as available as common writing. We shall return to this subject when we treat of mediums. When spirit manifestations first became known, and while ideas were vague and confused with regard to them, several works were published under the title of Communications of a Basket, of a Planchette, of a Table, etc. We now understand how erroneous were such titles, and how little serious was the character of those communications. For tables, planchettes, etc., are nothing but instruments without intelligence, although vitalized for the moment with an artificial life. Instruments utterly unable to communicate anything of themselves. The writers alluded to mistook the effect for the cause, the instrument for the agent. An author might just as well state on his title page that his book was written by a steel pen or by a goose quill. These instruments, moreover, are not the only ones that can be used. We know a medium who, instead of the basket or the planchette, used a funnel in the gullet of which he placed his pencil. Communications, then, can be given through a funnel. We might also get them through a saucepan or a salad drainer. If manifestations come by wrappings, and these wrappings are made by a chair or a walking stick, it is no longer a question of talking tables, but of talking chairs and talking sticks. What we really want to know is not the nature of the instrument employed, but the mode of obtaining communications. If a communication comes by writing, so that all we want is a pencil, we call it psychography. If it comes by raps, we call it psychography. Spiritism, being destined to attain the certainty of a science, requires specific terms for the various orders of phenomena with which it deals.